For more on the drought's economic impact, I'm joined by Shawn Hackett, president of Hackett Financial Advisors. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we heard it there from one of our reporters. Farmers and restaurateurs in California saying, be wary, prices are going to go up. What can consumers expect and how high will prices go?
Well, I think how high they're going to go up still has a lot to do with how much rain we get for the rest of the season. This week, we've been getting a lot of rain, actually, and there's a lot more rain expected over the weekend. In fact, they're expecting to get possibly half as much rain in the next week as they got all of last year. So there is still some hope that some ground will get planted. Some crops may do better. So how high they go up has a lot to do with whether this wet pattern is just a one-shot deal or whether or not we get maybe some catch-up here in the month of March and maybe ease the burden of the drought. It won't get rid of the drought, but it certainly might help. And so we're still hopeful that maybe some of these rains will ease some of the burden. But either way, we should see some higher prices by the summertime because most of what California produces is fresh produce that can't be stored.
Right, and what can consumers do to protect themselves, to prepare for any potential shortages? If one looks at what comes out of California, I mean, it is the major supplier of a great deal of fruits and vegetables, as well as nuts and grains to the United States.
Well, I mean, like I said, because most of what they produce isn't something that you can store, it's fresh produce, it spoils quickly. I think the best thing consumers can do is budget themselves and prepare their budget to have a greater allocation to these food items and prepare themselves financially for it so that they're not caught in a situation where they have to crimp on their food supplies or have overspent in other areas. So my view is it's really a budgetary item that consumers need to do and prepare for so they're not surprised when they go to the supermarket and the bill is much higher than they expected it to be.
Right, and of course the impact is also being felt by farmers. They are now having to choose which crops they want to grow on their land because of the shortage of water, because they're not getting water, federal water that is supplied by the federal government. In fact, one report says that 600,000 acres of arable land, or that's about 8% of the arable land in California, will be left fallow. And what kind of impact is that going to have?
Well, I mean, if you don't plant the ground and you don't have the production, it means that you're going to have much tighter supplies. It does look like that the government is going to help support these farmers, give them some aid, some financial benefit, some payments. So I do believe that the farmers will be able to get through this to next year, and you know, there's a strong commitment from our government to help everybody get through this, but it's not going to help bring more food on the table. That pretty much is a sure thing, but I do believe there's enough financial resources being put at this that most farmers will be able to come back next year and hopefully plant everything so long as the rains do eventually come.
Is there a possibility that these shortages can be made up, say, with supplies from other parts of the country or perhaps other parts of the world?
I mean, Mexico, Central America, they can provide a lot of this produce, like, for example, avocados or tomatoes. Mexico is prolific in producing. They can increase their exports to ease some of the shortages that develops in California. You can't make it all up. There's just too much production that will be lost, and it would take time for other countries to develop that increased production. But there are some places that could ease the burden some, but it wouldn't overcome it completely. There's still going to be shortages that develop.
Right, and California also, of course, it produces most of the fruits and vegetables which are consumed in the United States, but some of that is also shipped overseas. There is an export market. How will that be affected?
Yes. Well, if you look at the big export markets, Canada, Mexico, and China, including Europe, are the four biggest export markets that California sends their products to. So those would be the countries, especially China. You know, China is a prolific buyer of nuts, a prolific buyer of dairy products. So they could certainly feel an impact. You know, they're a prolific importer of cotton. So those would be you know, China, I think, would be disproportionately affected by having to pay substantially higher prices for those things they buy so much of from California. And that probably would be the greatest country that would have the greatest impact, in my view, would be China.
Okay, so thank you. That was Shawn Hackett talking to us there.